In a recent update to Nomad Sculpt, the developer added post-processing techniques, and we haven't fully covered those yet on this channel. If you're one of those people that have taken my beginner's Nomad course, this video that I'm about to show you is going to get added to that course, and also to a new mini course about creating a droid, which should be out by the end of this week. So let's have a look at the things that post-processing give us, like depth of field, adding bloom, tone mapping, ambient occlusion, curvature, all sorts of crazy uses that you can see right there in the viewport as you're sculpting. In a fairly recent update, Nomad brought us something called post-processing, and I think it's really important that we cover off all of this at the start of this little mini course. Post-processing is what we do to our models and our images at the end usually, but you can do it as you go along, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if you go up to the top and you look at the 6th button along from the left on my machine, you can see the post-process button there, and I'm going to pin it open with that little pin there so we can have a look at it in depth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work down the whole list one by one and show you what everything does, and at some point we're going to have to start building things to be able to show you what's happening. And that point's now actually, so let's just go straight away. We'll come over here and we'll make a plane, and we'll make a let me think, a box, and scale that down with the orange, and we'll bring it off the floor, bring the plane a little bit bigger, and you'll see exactly why we're doing this in a minute, because it gets quite complicated as we start adding things. And we need one more thing, which is a sphere, so we'll just do a very basic sort of setup with a couple of primitives on a plane. Now, obviously, you're going to do this with a droid at some point, so it's good to know it from a very, very basic level. So take the floor and validate it. That means it's now editable. Take the sphere, I'm just tapping on it and then validating. And also, one thing I'm going to do, what I always do, so that you know what I've got selected clearly, is to come up here to display settings and hit outline. And I'll make it a silly color so you can really see, and do that all the time, so it's now bright green. Okay, so we've got 3 items, and we've got, let's just double check what our shading settings are. So we're on PBR at the moment, which is physically based rendering, and we might change that as time goes on. If you go to matte cap or material cap, you're not going to get all of the post-processing features that we want. So let's go to PBR first of all, and we'll start working through each one. So at the top we've got switched it on, and then we've got max samples and well, it's basically quality. We've got max samples and full resolution. If you click the little question mark there, it says activate these options to improve the quality. Basically, if you're going to get better reflections, ambient occlusion, and depth of field if you have that on. So I'm going to leave that on. If you've got a low-end iPad, if you're running out of RAM at any time, then turn those off. But for most iPad Pros, I'd suggest you keep that on all the time. And then the first thing that we get is this, which is reflection. So if we turn that on, nothing really happened. So let's just have a think about why that wouldn't happen. So it's got to do with the material. So let's take the floor, and we'll come down here to the bottom right, and we're going to make the roughness, we're going to bring that all the way down, and the metalness all the way up. And what that means is we're making it very metal-like, so that's giving it a lot of reflection, and we're bringing the roughness down so the surface is very smooth and glossy. And you can change the colour at that point. So we're going to do some primary colours here just to make it nice and easy. And then force paint, and you can see now what we've got is a reflection of the HDRI in the background. If you don't know what HDRI is, come up to shading, and these are our HDRIs. So these are wrap round spherical images that are being used to reflect the scene, and as I'm changing it, it's reflecting in that plane there. They're not particularly high res here. Okay, so we'll go back to a nice blue sky one. Let's go back to this one. Okay, so let's now, you can see a reflection of the sphere and a reflection of the cube in the scene. This is obviously a fake reflection. It's not like true ray tracing, but it's more than adequate for what we're going to do. So let's go to the sphere. I'm going to validate it, and we'll flood fill that, and we'll make this one red, and force paint it, and then the sphere, we'll make that green, so we can really see all the differences. Now, what you might notice, if I bring the sphere close to the the cube, you might be able to see that the cube is actually reflected in there to some degree. So it is quite it's not a very basic system. See how blocky that sphere is. If we come up and we change the subdivision, that instantly improves the look, and you can see that sphere is better. Straight away you're getting a better reflection of it in there. Again, don't be trying to don't be thinking that you're going to get the level of Blender or Cinema 4D with Redshift or Arnold or anything like that, other render engines. This is simply a viewport render engine, and it's very, very, it's very, very good for what it is. But you're not going to get that higher end look. You need to go to other programs on a desk based system if that's what you're after. Okay, let's carry on working down. So we've done reflection, we've got reflection on, so let's put ambient occlusion on and see what that does. So ambient occlusion is going to affect wherever two objects are close together, and what I will do just to help is I'm going to turn off, let me just go a different colour. I'm going to bring the roughness right up, and I'm going to bring the metalness all the way up as well, and then we'll flood fill that so there's no reflection or shininess at all in that. So we'll do the same for this one, and it just means we've got flat non-reflective items here at the moment. And we'll do it once more for the sphere, and we'll do a different colour. I'm just changing these colours so we can clearly see what we're dealing with. Okay, so if you now look underneath the model, so let's bring the sphere down, and as it approaches the floor, you can see the shadow. Now that isn't a cast shadow, that's an occluded shadow, and that means wherever something covers something, you'll get an occluded area. And that's really, really crucial to getting things to look realistic. You can see as it goes away, the shadow disappears, the occluded shadow disappears. So let me just prove to you that it is an occlusion shadow. So if we switch on, go up to our lighting, and we add a light, and we'll click that light and change it to a spotlight, and we'll just move we'll move it around. So click on it and bring it up in the air. And again, just make sure it is a spotlight, which it is. Rotate it around. Just trying to make it a bit extreme. It's a bit like a 1990s 3D modeling tutorial at the moment with this look. Okay, so there you go. So now you can see you've got your cast shadow, and you've got your occluded shadow is still there. So if you bring this up, your cast shadow will remain, and the occlusion shadow disappears. And as you get closer, you'll see there that the occlusion shadow comes in. And if I duplicate that, and you'll see that where there's two models close together, like this, you'll see occlusion right in the creases. And that is crucial to get realistic looking scenes. So one way to show you that is just to turn it on and off. You can see how plasticky and CG it looks without that. Now you can adjust the strength, the size, and you've also got the curvature bias as well. So you can really play with those to get a nice looking effect. One thing that you can't do yet, unfortunately, is you can't change the colour of it. But I'm sure that will come at a later stage. And while we're on the subject of those lights, if you click on the light, you've got an ability to soften the light, and you can increase the cone angle as well. And that might soften the shadow, as you can see there. So that again is another way to make it more and more realistic. What we'll do is just reduce the intensity on the light slightly. All of these subtle little things are what makes an image look, you know, more and more real as you're playing with it and evolving it. Let's change that to a green. In fact, no, I'll change the sphere to a green. Okay, so on to the next one. So if we move down now, we've now got depth of field, and this is quite a straightforward one. So the easiest thing to do here is if I move this green one here and move the sphere further out over here, and then we look at it from this angle, everything's in focus. So if you put your depth of field on, go back to your post-process, depth of field on, and then you can see just straight away the one in the foreground is blurred, one in the background is now sharp. So if I click the green one with my finger, so I'm simply just tapping on the green one, everything in the background, you know, it blurs off as you go off into the background. So something that you may want to play with a lot here with depth of field is your near blur and your far blur. So you can see it's affecting the distance. If I click the front one, so I click the back one, and then play with the near blur, you can improve it, increase it or decrease it from either the front or the back. So that's a really good one for getting your models to look like they're realistic, because again, you're basically giving it camera attributes. So like a camera with a low f-stop or a very wide open aperture will give you that that focal depth, that look of out of focus background, and that's something that photographers go for all the time, certainly portrait photographers, and it can really make a difference for things like toy photography or toy rendering. So just have a play with that and be careful not to overuse it, because it can get a little bit cheesy if you go too far with it. So that's depth of field covered. One that I don't really use, notice I'm leaving them on, by the way. One I don't use a lot is bloom. So bloom will blow out and make glow anything that's light. So you can see the red areas aren't going lighter, but the light areas are going, very, very much lighter. So an example of that would be if I make it white on the sphere, and come back and put the bloom up, you can see the white areas of the sphere are blowing out straight away, and there's a few things you can play with, like the threshold, which can really, if you bring that right down, that can really blow out the whole scene. It looks quite angelic, and even when you bring the intensity and the radius down, it's still going to be intense. Now I don't use that a lot at all. You might want to use it for lights or to affect lights, but it's something that I keep off most of the time. Now on to the next one. So we've got tone mapping, and this is a great one. I'd usually do this at the very, very end of a project. So tone mapping on, and you've got an exposure. So obviously brighter and darker. You've got a contrast, which will really pump those values. So it's going to make the blacks blacker and the whites whiter. And so same as you would in Photoshop or for Procreate. And you've got this one, again, one of my favorites, the saturation. So I quite often do a model and then I'll bring the saturation to nothing and pump the contrast up, and you get an instant noir looking image, and you can get some really, really amazing effects. Don't forget, with your lighting, with 3 fingers, you can roll that lighting round, and you can try different lighting environments by rolling them round like that. And again, with a combination of these post processes and the lighting, you can really make your scenes pop. So I'll just turn that off because it'll affect what we're doing on the next section quite dramatically. So next section is curvature. So what I'll try to do is I'll bring it back. So I'll bring this model back here and then duplicate that. I want a few more cubes for this next bit. Just bring that out here. And then we go to post-processing and turn curvature on. Now what you'll get with this is 2 settings, so 2 main settings for this. You've got cavity and bump. And what you'll find is I'll make them quite dramatic so you see. So I'll do your bump as blue and I'll do your cavity as white, and you'll see why in a moment. So What you generally find here is that anything in the cavity areas, so let me just show you on the sphere. So anything that's on the inside, so you can see where there's ambient occlusion, you'll get that white colour because the cavity is white. And wherever you've got the outer areas, so for example, the edges of the cube, that's blue because that's classed as the bump. So on the sphere, let's have a look what that's done. Obviously hasn't done anything for the sphere because it's just it's got the outline on. But if you have a look at let's subdivide something. So we'll subdivide this cube and we'll see what that's done for us. We'll delete those layers, delete the lower layers. And you can see where it's subdivided on the edge, it's highlighting all of those edges. You can see there on that one, it's highlighting the edges as well. So as you get more complex models, and you'll see that when we get towards the end of the droid modeling, the curvature can really make a difference. You can really get some strong effects on your on your model, surface of your model. So I'll just turn that off again so we can see. And what I will do just for a moment is I'll turn that outline off because it's going to affect what we're about to do next. So on the next bit, which is chromatic aberration, you can see there, switch it on and put it maximum. Now what that does, that's like something that you get on in photography where the lens has kind of split the colours. You can see around the edge of that sphere, if I turn it on and off, you can see that colour range there, and it's almost like the RGB, so the red, blue and green has been split, and you get an offset. You sometimes see that kind of effect in print sometimes where they've missed the colours. That isn't it, but that's how it looks. And you'll find, certainly you can see down here on the edges, the blue channel has come out on the sides. So only use that when you want that specific effect, and you'll know when you need that effect. So it's something that's there when you need it. Vignette, or vignetti as you may pronounce it if you pronounce it wrong. So vignette is something you'd see in old-fashioned photographs where it blurs the edges or darkens the edges of old photographs, and you can tighten it down with hardness, and that will bring it in like that all the way to a hard edge there. And that's really useful if you just want to pinpoint something and you want to highlight something in the middle of your scene like that. So again, be very careful with it. You can't change the colour, which would be nice, but it is useful sometimes just to pump that focal point of in the middle. But it can be well overused, so be a little bit mindful of that. Turned it off. Grain is pretty much what it says, so just increase the amount of grain. So again, it's called post-processing for a reason, and that's because we're doing this in post, so after we've made the model. So generally, you'd only turn this stuff on when you've come to the end of your project. And the last one, in the same vein, is sharpness. And that will just be the same as a sharpness algorithm in Photoshop, and it just sharpens up the image. So again, you can get things looking really sharp, far too sharp and far too fake. So use that with care. That's a good spread of all the post-processing, and you'll find that these things are used right the way through my training. So here's an example of where I would use a lot of the post-processing on a character model. So this is Sebastian the crab from Little Mermaid. You might recognise that little guy. So we've got post-processing on, and we're going to put quality up, and we're going to put reflection on. And straight away, if you see the floor, we've then instantly got the reflection of Sebastian down there in the floor. So let's make that floor a little bit darker so it really shows him. And there you go, you can see. So that is really useful as you're building your scenes, because a reflection can be obviously quite powerful. So what was the next one we looked at? So let's put ambient occlusion on, and instantly you'll see that makes the scene look more realistic, and we'll crank that quite high. Again, as I said, it would be great to be able to tint that. You know, here I'd be wanting to, if we've got a very orangey red scene, I'd go the opposite of that and would do a lot of kind of blue dark shadows underneath. But it is what it is, and it's very, very good as it is, and I can always colour it later. We'll switch on depth of field. Now we probably don't need it so much with this character because he's not very you know, he's not very wide back to front. But if you just pop the focus on the front claw, you can see that the background goes out of focus, so it does give it a little bit more reality. Let's have a next one down. Bloom I won't put on. I said I don't use it, and I probably wouldn't use it in this environment. Tone mapping, you know, you can have a look at it in black and white. You can see if your values are reading. You can see how blown out that background is with the model. So that might make me now check that background and sort that out a little bit. And, you know, you wouldn't want to pump the contrast too high, or even the exposure that much on this. But you've got the option is there and available to you. I'm going to turn that off. Curvature is the one I wanted to talk about the most, and that's as you can see there, that's cavity is white there, so we could make that black, and your bump we could make black as well, and you get a very graphic style, so you get a lot of black ink lines in there as well. Or you could go white on both of them, and you see it's a much more illustrative look, and again, you could pick any color you want. You could make the whole crab blue, and then just do bluey white lines, something like that, to make it more like a blueprint or something like that. But just you know, try these settings on all of your models as it, you know, you get the opportunity to do it. I'll turn curvature off. Chromatic aberration set to full. Again, you can just see the color split, the split channel around the edges. You can see it popping green there. Won't be, you know, you'll know when you need to use that. Vignette, there we go, nice vignette. And I would use a vignette on something like this to really highlight the character. So that's where a vignette can come in useful, where you've got a very small scene like this and you just want to highlight a part of it. We'll move down to the last two. So we've got grain and sharpness both on, and you can play with them, you know, depending on what kind of scene you want before you export. Sharpness I find is really useful when you've got things like complex surfaces like feathers or bumps and wrinkles or anything like that. And there you go, you can see how useful those post-processing features are, and how you can use them in your project. I really hope you're liking these videos, and if you are, please give us a thumbs up. It does help us get in front of other artists who like this kind of content. And if you are liking it, then why not subscribe to the channel and let us tell you when we'll upload new content, which is usually on a Wednesday or a Friday. I hope the video was useful, and have a great week.